Well, if you heard some screaming from Marcus Freeman's office a few minutes before 1 o'clock Eastern time today, it's because Notre Dame received a letter of intent signed by Madden Faremo, the linebacker, the highly coveted linebacker that Notre Dame's been recruiting. Hi, everybody. Tim Prister, Tim O'Malley, John Brice. This is Irish Illustrated's Instant Analysis, brought to you by RV Manufactured Housing Hall of Fame in Elkhart, Indiana. Madden Faremo, number 25 in the class for Notre Dame. We did not expect that until about a few minutes before the press conference started, and we got an inkling that he could be coming Notre Dame's way.
Kind of ruined the surprise, but I think we can all live with it. You know, that little text message. But yeah, I'm going to adjust my recruiting rankings as well. I'd like to add Madden Faremo to the top of the class. Yeah. It's a huge get. I remember probably 3-4 months ago, people were saying they made a list of players. Meadows was on it. Faremo was on it. Who are the guys you want? And everybody kind of came back around to, well, Faremo, a linebacker, is going to have a much bigger impact than a freshman wide receiver. And I think we saw that this past year. And that group going into next year it was even more exciting than this year when I said this is an exciting group of linebackers. I cannot wait to see them play together next year.
And, you know, the coaching carousel giveth and the coaching carousel taketh away. Notre Dame should probably send a gift basket to Fresno State for hiring one Matt Entz away from USC to be its next head coach. That's been a fascinating process there. Tim Skipper, the interim, had tried to get that job. They've been in very deep talks with Brent Vegan, the splendid head coach of the Montana State Bobcats, who are undefeated and the number one seed in the FCS playoffs. I don't think they could wait. Brent Vegan's got way too much class to bail on his team in the early sessions of the FCS playoffs. They pivot to Matt Entz, a proven national championship winning coach at ND State, and ultimately the beneficiary today is the University of Notre Dame.
You know, Marcus Freeman, of course, preaches with his players to choose hard. And that was a mantra he had used with Madden Faremo. Madden Faremo said, "I chose God," which is another great quote that came out of the press conference. Had there not been a Faremo added to this group, we may have reflected that a little bit more like we did in a podcast yesterday, because the back end of this is not quite what Notre Dame has come to expect. But the front end is a good 10 to 12 solid of really good football players, 6 defensive backs that will make a huge difference for Notre Dame. Something that I didn't really give consideration to, that I've been in this business a long time, that I wouldn't have expected years ago, to say that 3 guys from Indiana, Brandon Logan, Mark Zachary, and Cam Herron, were a really significantly positive addition to this class, and that's the case.
No, for Notre Dame has to be selective, but it has to get the best talent in Indiana. For me, that starts with Mark Zachary, just a really fine player. And we heard Marcus Freeman denote, you know, some football guys are football guys on a basketball court. Mark Zachary is a basketball player on a basketball court. Andrew Mintock did a fabulous job of putting together some of Mark Zachary's dunks back on social media in the summer, and we've all seen them. But a huge linchpin of this class, and Notre Dame can't ever go too Indiana heavy, but it always has to maintain a presence. That's testament to Marcus Freeman, Chad Bowden, and as we move forward here, I think another critical component of today's press conference is the fact that Notre Dame saw all of these commitments live in person. They saw them compete in a various variety of things. What a repeat of words there, various variety. That's terrible by me. But they saw them in game settings. They saw them in camp settings. They saw them in a number of competitive environments. And when you talk about Marcus Freeman and Chad Bowden wanting them to choose hard, to be competitors, they know the competitive DNA of this class.
If you're a Notre Dame fan, glass half full, glass even quarter full, you have to trust the staff's evals. If you're a guy that studied a lot of recruiting but doesn't work in recruiting like me, I look at the middle of this class, and I think every class back half is either going to surprise you or be the back half of a class. I look at the middle of this class, and the middle could be closer to the back than Marcus Freeman's last 2 classes. That's how I would evaluate this. The 2023 class, as I said, if I'm rating Cooper Flanagan and a Don Schuler at 18, that's a class. I'm not close to that in this class, but if you're, as I said, they saw them all live. If this is their evals, you have to trust those evals. I just think the middle of the class looks like a back half of the class. the back half of every class looks like the back half of a class. You don't want a huge back half of the class.
No, and to your point, I will say, it took Fresno State hiring Ince, but they get the number one linebacker on their board. They get Will Black, the number one tackle, on their board. They really like their tackles as a whole, but they identified Will Black as the number one tackle on their board maybe 18 months ago. It was a really long time ago that they pegged him as the number one tackle on their board for 2025. And then, we all have to, I think, trust their evals because they've proven that they've been very elite with the evals, from a Anthony Knapp, as we heard Marcus Freeman reference today, to Emil Wagner, to obviously some of the DBs that they've developed.
Leonard Moore, that wasn't necessarily highly rated. I do like the speed at receiver, although I think Antavius Richardson is more natural on defensive side of the ball.
The fact that he's now named Scrap makes him at least one star higher, so that's fantastic.
Listed as Scrap Richardson, of course, Elijah Burris, who I have him in my top 5. I think that he's a difference-making talent. I never understood why his ranking was what it was, or why his recruiting list was what it was. And then you look at the offensive line. There's certainly great potential there. I think Matty Augustine is a guy that has some ground to make up. But I really like the other 3, including Cam Herron, who is my Howard Cross the third equivalent here of a guy that's undersized, but I think he's going to do just fine on the collegiate level.
Yeah, I don't think I noticed either there were 6 defensive backs in this group, and I bring that up again because Mike Mickens is going to be their coach. So if you have an issue with a defensive back evaluation, I would take it up with somebody else because Mike Mickens knows what he's doing there. As long as he is involved in this, he knows what's going to work at that position. He can turn a very good player into a great player, as we saw with Leonard Moore, and I think he turns guys that we don't know where they might fit into contributors for Notre Dame.
And to the point about trusting evals, certainly you understand the angst and the anguish at the wide receiver position because there's more pressing need there. But when you talk about a Matty Augustine, not only do you trust the eval because of what we've seen this year from an Anthony Knapp and, again, Emil Wagner, but you also trust the eval there because Notre Dame has as good an offensive line depth as any program in the country. So they can take some guys and say, we don't need you to play in 25. We need you to be on special teams in 26 as a redshirt freshman, and we need you to be competing for a starting spot in 27.
It's the only position. It's the only position to go old school on that.
Right, it is. Now Notre Dame's got to have that kind of depth in more spots, especially on the defensive line. But at offensive line, you trust those evals, especially because Notre Dame's depth there is as good as anywhere in the country.
They are a legitimate 2 deep along the offensive line going into next year. Marcus Freeman talked about Blake Hebert, the quarterback. There's no plan to go to the transfer portal. That is what Marcus Freeman is saying today, and that was backed up by other comments made here today.
His 4 quarterbacks, I think, is part of the reason you don't have to go to the transfer portal. If one decides I got to go, you need a 4th quarterback.
I would just say it's easy and it's smart to say today there's no plan to go to the transfer portal. We will see April 15th if Marcus Freeman and Chad Bowden still say we're not going to the transfer portal for a quarterback.
The plan to have 4 quarterbacks, John, the plan to have 4 quarterbacks on your roster is a bit ambitious these days. It's very difficult to do.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of his point, that, Kenny Minchie wants to be at Notre Dame, Steve Angeli wants to be at Notre Dame, C.J. Cars is ensconced as a guy that's going to be at Notre Dame, and they just brought in a recruit. Those are your 4 guys. You shouldn't go to a transfer portal if you feel good about all those 4 and all 4 are staying. It's going to screw something up. Right. It's definitely pushing somebody out. Nobody would push out Minchie or Angeli, obviously. If someone has to leave, then you have to go to the transfer portal. And I think it was true. I think there's veracity in the statement, but there's also wiggle room for if somebody leaves, you're not going to just sit there and say, well, I promised these 3 guys we're not going to go to the portal. That's not it either.
You'll have to do it if it's necessary. We'll have another podcast on Thursday, and then Sunday when the announcement of the 12-team playoff is made, we'll have a live stream of our evaluation overtime. And until then, I'm Tim Priester with Tim O'Malley and John Brice. This has been Irish Illustrated's Instant Analysis.